Well, the top story this week is Stanford's general use permit. They have applied to have it's kind of a one-shot ask for growth for the next 18 years through 2035. And because it's unincorporated county land, the county's the one deciding on the application. This has been kind of in the works for a number of months. I remember we met with Stanford several months ago, earlier this year.
It was almost a year ago, I think.
Was it really?
It feels like it's been a while.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
But now it's kind of seeping into the public consciousness as far as what the impacts of the plan could be in terms of traffic, housing, a lot of different issues, schools. So we're just here to catch up on where the application stands. And why don't we start with the meeting last night with the County Planning Commission. They actually came to Palo Alto to hear what residents have to say. And residents are, seems like fully engaged now. They've arrived.
Yeah, it was a great meeting. I mean, I remember going to the initial one in October, early October. There was a Lucy Stern. It was about discussing the new environmental impact report for the Stanford expansion. There were maybe like 5 or 6 people who were not on staff. There were about 120 at least at last night's meeting. They were packed into the Arts Center. A lot of really good comments. Wide variety of topics. So it does seem like the interest is kind of catching up to a project that is considered one of the largest in like the county's history in terms of land use planning. Yeah,
2.275 million square feet of academic space. That's what they're asking for, plus 3,150 housing units and 40,000 square feet of childcare facilities.
Yeah, like childcare and like transportation hubs and like supporting spaces.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We haven't really covered the Planning Commission at the county level. Who's on it? Give us a sense of who they are, and because they cover the entire county, you wouldn't expect their attention to be as focused on Palo Alto or maybe as knowledgeable about what's going on?
Yeah, it's 7 people. They're appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Each of the 5 supervisors gets one, and then there's the other 2 spots that are kind of being appointed on a rotating basis. And as the case may be, JOCELYN, who's the one supervisor who represents this area, because of the way rotation works, 3 of the people were appointed by him. But it's most of them are from, the other 4 pretty much represent other parts of the county. And I think we spoke with Joe earlier this week, and as he mentioned, they don't usually debate these kinds of things. It's highly unusual for them to kind of get involved in this kind of process. But what was encouraging yesterday is that at the end of all the public comments, there were a few commissioners who, even though they're not from the area, they did kind of sympathize with a lot of the concerns. And in fact, one of them who hasn't been here before, or who hasn't been here that often, said he's actually made an effort to kind of get to Palo Alto from like East Bay, things like that, and to see the commute for himself, so to get the experience. And so they were very, very excited about the fact that 120 people or so came to their meeting, which seems like it's very unusual for them too. So I think from the public engagement standpoint, it was highly successful.
What kind of role will they play in the process? Will they provide a recommendation at some point to the Board of Supervisors? Do they have power to sort of ask Stanford to change things? Or?
Well, I believe it's similar to the city. It's going to be, I'm sure they'll have a chance to kind of like discuss with Stanford, potential changes and bring up their concerns. But I think their biggest power is influencing the Board of Supervisors, who will have the ultimate vote. I feel like in most cases, the commission is expected to do the kind of deep digging kind of
groundwork.
The groundwork to kind of get all the issues out, so that when it gets to the supervisors, a lot of these things are vetted. But because this project is so complex, and you have everything from traffic impacts methodology to housing linkage fees and all these kinds of really deep technical stuff, I think the Planning Commission is going to be instrumental in kind of vetting these issues on a very detailed level in a way that the supervisors really can't do, because of all the other stuff they deal with.
Yeah, and somebody, and when we met with him this week, he also mentioned that like the Planning Commission, he is the one on the Board of Supervisors that represents this area, and his colleagues just don't have enough familiarity with the area and these issues, so it makes that work even more important.
Yeah, absolutely. They have the same expertise as he does about Gilroy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they have their own issues, especially with San Jose, Sunnyvale and such. So it's interesting how Stanford kind of is framing this application. I remember them using the word amendment at one point, like this is just an update to the 2000 general use permit, affectionately known as the GUP, which we can now say, they just defined it, the GUP. So continuing on policies that were already established 17 years ago, like the Transportation Demand Management Program that was required by the No Net New Trips policy. But some people are saying that, yeah, it's not really what it seems. It's not such a, there are some issues that need to be addressed now, even if they were fine back in 2000, because traffic has increased and housing, we have a shortage now, so it seems like the expectations are really ratcheted up.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on whom you ask. This is either business as usual, which if you're Stanford, it's just 1.2% annual growth in academic space. 1%, we're getting so fed up about. And of course, if you're someone like Smidian, this is the largest land use project in the county's history.
Right.
So it's kind of very different ways of looking at it. The truth is somewhere in between. I mean, it's 2.275 million square foot of academic space. I mean, Palo Alto has a cap of 50,000 in office space per year. And this is 2.275 million, and plus the housing and all the other stuff. So it is colossal. But and the way I feel like the truth is somewhere in the middle is because even though a lot of the policies are sort of continuing from the initial GUP, which is why Stanford would say this is just a continuation or an amendment, they're not exactly being continued. They're being changed and refined in subtle ways that are kind of creating, some wrinkles in this kind of review process. With some people are saying, A, they're no longer adequate, and B, they're being changed in a way that will make them no longer adequate. So, yeah, it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So let's look at some of the sticking points and figure out where the public is, or some members of the public are, and where Stanford is. So traffic is one thing.
Issue number one, by far. Yeah.
A top issue. So Stanford's done, by most accounts, an amazing job with managing their traffic. They switched, they had 72% single driver rate before in 2000, now that's down to 50% through Marguerite shuttles. And
I think it was 43 last I checked, as far as a single
I thought it was lower, and then I saw a brochure recently that seemed it was only 50. We'll give them credit for whatever they've done. Yeah. They made a huge effort on that scale.
They had, but whichever number you use, I believe it's 43, but it's either way, it's hugely successful.
Yeah.
I mean, the Marguerite shuttle, their incentives for biking, for carpooling, for van pooling, all the bike improvements, they've clearly had a huge impact. Whether they've actually achieved no-net commute trips depends on whom you ask. I mean, technically speaking, they have. If you look at the counts that the county does twice a year, but a lot of people are saying Stanford basically brings commuters in other hours. It's like you come in after 10 o'clock and you don't count as a commute trip.
Yeah.
But conditions have changed. Now you have traffic well beyond. So
yeah.
So the impacts are real, no matter what the count says.
Yeah. I think the measurement there, if you just look at 7 to 9, and what was the other, 4 to 6?
Like 4 to 6, yeah.
7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. And only measure whether or not they've succeeded within those hours. That doesn't reflect the entire picture of how much traffic is coming on to campus and leaving. So some people have mentioned that in public comments, and I guess there's a petition.
Yeah, and yesterday there were a lot of people talked about traffic.
Yeah.
I'd say a very good share of the comments concern themselves.
That was brought up at the school board meeting about a month ago as well. The woman who used to lead Safe Routes to School brought that up and saying, it's not really accurate just to measure those hours only. And also the evening peak hours doesn't cover the after school commute in the afternoon. So wanting them to sort of take that into account.
Yeah, and that's Palo Alto's official position as well. Like the letter that they're sending, or they're planning to discuss and possibly send, kind of makes that point. Their transportation consultant actually dug up some data that shows that there were certain days where the commute was actually worse, like after 9, like 9:30, and 6:30, like after the peak. So they're saying that this no longer holds. And to make this even more complicated, Stanford is proposing kind of, if it's not able to maintain constant traffic levels, can we get credits by reducing traffic downtown or somewhere a little further away, which could be a great thing if they do like a huge infrastructure project that costs millions that really makes a difference. But if you live really close to Stanford, it's like it might be a little frustrating to see, if our traffic gets worse, you'll fix the problem
Someone
elsewhere.
else's traffic will get easier.
Yeah, that's also been a little bit contentious.
Yeah. Housing is another issue that's been raised. So 3,000-ish housing units have been proposed. That's 550 faculty units, and then beds for the rest. So you got 3,000 on one hand, but the estimation of the growth on campus would be 9,600. Yeah. So there's clearly not a one-to-one ratio there, and there's a petition that's been circulated. I believe it was launched by former Mayor Peter Dreckmeyer.
Yeah, I mean, Peter's one of the signatories, and he did talk about the petition. I'm not sure if he was the only person launching, but it was read out loud at yesterday's meeting. And
Yeah.
housing, I mean, the petition concerns itself mostly with kind of like maximum build out, things of that nature. But housing was certainly like a huge issue at yesterday's meeting.
Yeah.
Many people, not just Palo Alto residents, but people who work at Stanford, like not faculty, but like staff, like the
Yeah.
janitorial staff. I mean, they're all very concerned about the amount of housing that Stanford is proposing and feeling that it's insufficient to cover the number of people, which, as you mentioned, 9,600, who are expected to be added in terms of faculty, staff, and students with this expansion plan. And a relative issue is the fees that, the per square foot fees that Stanford is expected to contribute for housing. There's some debate as to how big these fees should be, and that's still also unresolved, and it also came up yesterday.
Yeah. I think what's interesting partly is that, so Stanford has already been contributing these fees for low-income housing. That huge portion went to Buena Vista in large part. I think there were some other projects as well that were supported through that fund.
It was 14.5 million.
14.5 million went to Buena Vista. People are now saying, okay, well, low income is one thing, but we've got all these sort of low to mid-income folks who are employed by the university. Where are they going to end up? Are they going to end up commuting from, the East Bay or where have you? So I see that kind of as I don't know if it's a new thread, but definitely a strong thread.
Yeah, there's actually a new group on campus that includes many of the SCU workers and allies kind of within the school. I think they call themselves Scope 2035. It's an acronym.
Okay.
And that is one of their big issues, the need not to exacerbate the jobs housing imbalance and to kind of make sure that people have a place to live nearby, not have to commute from this far.
Yeah.
So again, that's still being debated, kind of like how much the fees they should put in, although so far I haven't heard any alternatives as far as housing numbers or things like that. I think 3,150 is still what Stanford plans to do.
That was interesting when we were meeting with Supervisor Simidian that he observed that Stanford would probably rather contribute fees so that housing is built off campus, so that land on campus is used flexibly for academic purposes or other things, which makes a lot of sense if you're an organization looking to the future and not quite sure whether or not space is going to be used academically, and even if it is, then how so, that kind of thing. The school board's also addressed the Stanford GUP. A couple meetings this past month.
Yeah, they had a special meeting in early November and then discussed it again at a regular meeting, and they're set to approve on Tuesday a formal sort of comment letter of their responses, and the most major of which being they think that given this growth, there's going to need to be a whole other elementary school on the Stanford campus. That the existing two schools that serve faculty with students or children of faculty or kids who live in that area, Escondido and Nixon, are already either at capacity or I think almost over capacity. So they can't really accommodate the number of students that are projected to come in from new housing and other people who would move on campus. So. And all board members who are weighing in on this issue, Ken Dauber's recusing himself because his wife works at Stanford, so the four other members all agreed that we need to look seriously at opening another elementary school.
In the West area?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Board Trustee Todd Collins attended yesterday's meeting and made comments to that effect as well. He basically said we need a West Campus school to handle the West Campus, and he talked about the possible traffic conditions that could be exacerbated if people are forced to kind of go across, if students are forced to go across campus. So that came up with.
Yeah, but Stanford's position is that Escondido and, the other school. Nixon are fine and have capacity.
Well, so there's this other sort of in the weeds issue about the district's student generation rate, and Stanford was using a rate that the board members said was flawed and inaccurate, and they were relying on this number from an enrollment forecaster that the district uses, but for some reason says they're not reliable. Basically, they're this 5-year forecast that sort of uses different factors that they say shouldn't be used for decision making like this. So they suggested using a different generation rate, which was higher than what Stanford had used.
Generation rates are when you build a house, how many students can you expect to be generated out of it?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So the district is sending a letter itself with some of these points in it?
Yeah, so they have a 9-point letter about the generation rate, about a new elementary school.
They actually want the land for it, Stanford to provide the land for that as well.
Right, and that's the issue. I think that they can't just build a school there. Stanford has to give the green light. They had the same, peak commute hours traffic comment. And the other issue for the school district is that since they rely so heavily on property taxes, if Stanford builds more housing for faculty, which is tax exempt, and then there are more students, and there's not a new school, the district doesn't get more money as more students come in. So if there wasn't a new school, but they're absorbing more students, that just means fewer dollars spread around.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So maximum build out is kind of an issue that's been raised, and the university and the Board of Supervisors thought it was addressed back in 2009.
Some did, yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because the concept is interesting, and where that stands is also kind of interesting.
Well, a lot of people who are concerned about protecting open space and sustainability and the long-term future have one basic question for Stanford, like what is your end game? Because it's not, as you mentioned earlier in our discussion, Stanford doesn't have zoning like Palo Alto does, where you have a property and you know the maximum it could have. It has these like every 10, 15 years, this huge plan for $2 million, and then it can come back and ask for more. So for people like former Mayor Peter Dreckmeyer, who's one of the kind of leaders of demanding a maximum build-out, they were heavily involved in 2000 when the existing permit was approved, and they fought really hard to make sure that the existing permit, the 2000 permit, specifically asked Stanford to create a study, sustainability development study, that identifies the maximum build-out. And Stanford hasn't done that. They did create a study, but it kind of looks at 2035 as the horizon, not ultimate.
Not ever.
Not ever. And they kind of look at what moderate building would look like, how to do it sustainably, how to protect open space, which was enough to satisfy the supervisors in 2009 in approving that study by a 3-2 vote. But for people like Peter, who attended last night's meeting, and 300, I think it was 370 or so by the end of last night, who signed the petition, that's not enough. That's not what they were supposed to do. I mean, Peter yesterday said basically, we feel cheated, we worked so hard for this. So they want to make sure that this time around, when the Board of Supervisors approves the new Stanford GUP, that they actually require this again and actually make Stanford comply with it, say this is as far as we'll go.
But there's no legal ramifications, though, to the board having already, Board of Supervisors having approved this study. I mean, as far as the university is concerned, it's fulfilled its obligation underneath the 2000 GUP.
Yeah, as far as the university is concerned, I mean, they got the votes. It's a if they make the
Document's
argument,
passed.
if Stanford makes an argument, we can't look this far deep into the future. You don't know how things will change, and the Board of Supervisors buys it and votes. Then congratulations, Stanford, you win.
Yeah, well, it's a whole different concept. I mean, trying to find out like what's your ultimate total, square footage that could possibly be on campus versus what Stanford did in the development study, which was scenarios. This is our aggressive scenario. This is our moderate scenario.
Right.
And it's only until a certain period of time. And I know that everyone's afraid that, okay, in 2035, Stanford will come back, and then it'll just keep going on and on. So
Probably before 2035, but yeah.
yeah, for renewal in 2035. So that's definitely something that I know the Planning Commission is probably going to look at.
Yeah, the maximum build-out, that is something that came up. And a related note to the maximum build-out is the whole protection of open space. Like the same people who really care about the maximum build-out issue are the ones who are also really concerned that down the line, maybe not now, but like maybe a decade from now, Stanford might want to start looking at building in the foothills or Uniparis, that kind of stuff. And as you know right now, thanks to the last permit, the hills are protected from development. You need a 4 out of 5 supervisors have to vote to change that, but that provision expires in 2025. And so after that, Stanford still can't build there because it's not zoned for building, but they could request an amendment which would require a simple majority. So the level of protection for the foothills would diminish. And so a few people, including Peter, and this is something the Planning Commission seems sympathetic to, ask for an extension for the foothills protection, especially since there's no certainty of how far Stanford will go beyond the 2035 horizon.
Yeah, and because the current GUP permit application doesn't mention anything about foothills.
Right.
Right, yeah.
They do mention that
they said there's no change.
There's no change.
now.
They're not going to build in the foothills. They're going to restrict to the academic growth boundary, the identified kind of central core campus.
Yeah. So Supervisor Samitian, being the representative from up here, where does he stand? What is his observation of the process at this point, and what is it that he wants to see?
Well, I think he was instrumental in kind of raising the level of engagement. I mean, I mentioned there were like 5 people sitting in the stands of the first meeting.
In October, yeah.
He was one of the 5. I mean, he had a big meeting a few days later that got way more people interested, and so I do think he's been quite effective at getting more people to be engaged in it, get more people to kind of submit comments, and he was also very instrumental in getting the county to approve another 60 days, which happened last night.
That's right.
For the EAR comment period. It was supposed to close on Monday. I know that the council was supposed to approve its letter on Monday, December 4th.
And the school board on
December
Tuesday.
5th.
On Tuesday.
And the county had already agreed to give them like an extra week, just to get the letters.
Okay.
But a lot of people were saying this is like 3 volumes. It's like 1,000 pages to analyze. We need another 60 days,
yes.
especially with the holidays and all that. So, so yesterday, the planning director from the county got an ovation from the crowd. I don't know how that happens to him in his day job, but how often. But people are very happy to see that they'll have more time to kind of vet these things, and February 2nd is the new deadline.
Okay. Yeah, some of the arguments for having the 60-day extension seemed pretty commonsensical because Stanford still has 600,000 square feet left under the old GUP, to develop. So it's not like certain plans are being held up at this point,
Yeah, but I think from Stanford's perspective, you don't want to drag down on this planning process longer than it
they
has
feel
to
like
be.
they've done what was necessary.
And they've done what's legally required, 60 days maximum unless there's unusual circumstances.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to how you define unusual.
Yeah. What was the tenor of the meeting last night?
Some people were very, very passionate, especially when it comes to the issue of traffic or workforce housing. One lady who, like a neighborhood resident, I think she lives in College Terrace, was talking about traffic and the horrible conditions, how they've deteriorated lately. She had like a Waze map showing red all over the place. Like, they came prepared.
Yeah.
And there were other people saying, most people had very good things to say about Stanford as an institution, but they kind of coupled that. It was one of those yes, but Stanford's awesome. But just because they do all these great cutting edge things, they can't just be simply absolved of the negative impacts. So, but I think it was polite. I mean, there was no shouting match. I feel like everyone had 3 minutes to talk. It was very orderly. I thought that the Planning Commission did a very good job, kind of keeping everybody going on time and making very succinct comments at the end. So I think people came away pretty happy. It was one of the more effective engagement meetings that I've been to for this project.
Yeah.
So
well, it seems like the engagement. They certainly helped the engagement by coming up here. I'm kind of curious when the Planning Commission meets in the future next year, how many people are actually going to be participating by going down there to speak out about these issues. Samidian, I was kind of interested because I wasn't quite sure how these negotiations work with Stanford. Like, does he actually personally talk to Stanford? Is it just the Planning Commission that works through the staff? The staff works with, Stanford University. I guess it's kind of both. He indicated that he, had met with the president. And has raised some issues for them to think about. There's kind of like a soft negotiation situation going on.
I feel like he's like the nudger-in-chief on this issue. He does a lot of nudging, but I think at this point in the game, up until it gets to his board, it's staff-level work. Like the planning director's decision is to extend it, being nudged by JOCELYN. And they have project planner Kavith Kumar, who's kind of dealing with the nuts and bolts of the application process. So I think it's staff driven now, but next year, I think next summer, next fall, when he predicts it's going to get to them, I think that's when the supervisors will have a chance to kind of put their own imprint on this.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is a major land use application, so it'll be with us for a while, but thank you for giving us the latest.
Pleasure.
We will keep an eye on it. All right, well, that wraps it up for this week's Behind the Headlines. If you want to subscribe or like this video, just click below. We're on PaloAltoOnline.com, and you can comment on the Stanford GUP on our Town Square forum, which is PaloAltoOnline.com/square. Also, check us out on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We'll see you next week.